Welcome to the Analytics Dynasty Sunday night Patreon live show hangout. I'm your host, Jordan McNamara, rocking the long hair for probably the last time. Got invited / told to come back to the office on Friday. I'd been working from home since March 16th, I believe, and haven't cut my hair since a lot longer than that. I think I got it cut like at least in late January. I think maybe I got it cut between then and the start of COVID. But I'll say this, I've only got my hair cut at least once, like no more than once since the Super Bowl. And no more than I have not cut it lengthwise since March 16th. So I did cut the sides of it off, but I left the top just because I get like this perm thing going on the side of my hair. But I've been rocking the long hair on top. So gonna see how long I can get away with it. Probably not gonna last very long. But I can sort of comb it over, gel it, and make it look none the wiser. But the length of it's probably the longest I've ever had it, which it's been pretty fun. It's been the one saving grace from COVID. So, or one of the saving graces. This has really been the main one, honestly. It's been a good outlet. All right, so let's break down some stuff. So lots of stuff going on. Lots of sort of wait and see, hit and miss, yada yada. I'm gonna start up right now. We'll have some more content coming down the pipe, probably end of this week, early next. I have a subscriber or two also in the draft, so I don't want to sort of table talk. So I'm waiting. I've done a pre-recording, some strategy recording with my co-owner, who's also the editor of the Analytics Dynasty, and then I am also going to do at least one post show, talk through some decisions, some fun stuff going on. I already dropped one of the trade things in there, so you can go check out. That was a good tactics trade that I had. So that was probably maybe like a week ago, something like that. I am in the process of writing some written stuff for 2021 for 3.0. I'm still thinking about a different name. So we'll see. But it's planning January or February release. We'll see. Sort of, I'm not set on the exact timeline yet, but we'll see. We'll figure that out. It's going to be no later than mid-February. So usually I do the NFC AFC championship game. I'm going to have to see how that all breaks out this year in terms of how everything rolls out. But I'll say no later than like Valentine's Day. So that's that. So I am doing some writing. So I'll be test driving some ideas. Totally interested in feedback. So comments on shows, DMs, group me chat, yada yada. Like all of it, like wherever. The private messages and Patreon. Give me your feedback. Interested in it. So I think I did one, released it today. 222. Basically different timelines. So totally open to feedback. Interested if you're like, hey, this is a horrible idea. That's fine too. Like I've always said about this, the best thing about Patreon is the quick feedback loop. So you get I get a quick feedback loop more so than when I write the book, because when the book gets such a long process, I don't sort of know until my editors read it sort of what anyone thinks, and then that's not that broad of an audience, and then I release the book, and then I sort of get a feedback loop after the fact. So it's always nice to have it a little bit earlier. So honest criticism, you will not offend me, don't worry. So that's that. Some other things working. So I am working some other things, some different ideas. I have some really interesting value findings. And one of the things that I've done this year more than years past is I've thought a lot about the research that I'm doing. And to give you an idea, I sort of, once I convince myself to write it, I sort of spend the off season doing it. I've done it a little bit differently this year. So I've I've been researching ideas, thinking about ideas, and basically doing the data research. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually just creating a lot of the illustrations isn't the right word. The visual stuff from the book, so charts, graphs, those sorts of things. And I'm actually I end up creating them, writing a note about it, copy, paste, put it in the thing. And then I keep going on. So I'm basically populating the book with illustrations or visualizations, not illustrations, visualizations first. And then I'm sort of getting all that in. And then I'm just going to go back and write. That's going to make the process infinitely easier for me. I tend to get bogged down in the writing process I'll sit down to write, I'll research, I'll get nothing written, spend the whole time researching. So it's just a different process for me this year. So hopefully it'll actually make it easier and sort of go with that. So like when I get a 4-hour window to write, like I can write 10 pages instead of it being, I spend 3.5 hours screwing around and then I get a half hour of 4 paragraphs written. Like this time when I actually sit down for block windows, I'll get block stuff done. So so that's all that. So I do have some interesting value stuff. I think it's different. I think it's really important. I think it's stuff that has never really been quantified in the market, at least to my knowledge. It's not anything that I've come across. And the people that I would sort of trust to do it haven't done it. So really excited about this, really, really excited about it. And I think value is kind of a myth to some degree. But I do think it's important to understand what to expect from player value going forward and sort of have an idea. So I have some concrete findings about this, and I'm really, really excited about them. And I do think it's not necessarily a myth, but I do think there is value movement. And the more I think about value, the more I think about it. And one of the questions is very good, and it'll dovetail into this. All the questions are very good, but one of them is directly on point on this, which is when I think about players, am I thinking about like it in an investment context? Well, I sort of, the more I'm doing this, I'm thinking about, listen, I want to make good picks, right? Obviously. If a player's undervalued or overvalued, right, there's a couple of different ways that I can go about that, right? If they're overvalued, I can just avoid them, right? Which is probably what I'm going to do. Or if they're uncertain and I don't feel like at that price, I like the uncertainty. That means they're overvalued probably by just a different word. I'll avoid them there. And Josh Jacobs might be a good example of this. Last year where I was like I wasn't quite the base rates fanatic that I am now. Like I'm pretty into rookie base rates now. Sort of when rookie drafts were going on last year, I didn't quite have it dialed in quite as much in terms of appreciating the impact of it. And again, each writing cycle for me, I come out hopefully smarter, but much more, process driven and much more come at it with a much more concrete view of decision making. And so Josh Jacobs is one that I didn't get burned by it in terms of, I didn't value him probably as highly as I should have. But now I caught a middle ground where he hasn't risen to the height that I think that he belongs. Right. So I've caught him sort of in the middle. And so thinking about that those things keep coming up in terms of being able to execute the strategies and those sorts of things. So looking at a lot of different things on value, and some different ideas. One of the things that really fascinates me is what's the average, like what should we expect from a first round running back in terms of like where should they go historically in the draft? And are they overvalued, undervalued now? And then sort of what should we expect from their value going forward? Like thinking about that like decision-making process for all different positions and all different pedigrees. Super helpful. And then I boiled this down to the top 10 rounds, or I think it's top 10, maybe top 150 picks, something like that. Some of the real outliers in terms of the data, it's tough to get, like you get weird players and it's tough to get ages and stuff. So I figured inside the top 10 rounds or so, it's much better. And in terms of boiling it down, so I'm really sort of focusing on like age in that range, thinking about like, all right, what does production do, or what does a lack of production do to players at different ages, right? So I'm looking at all these different things, and I think I'm on to some things that are important in terms of how we understand player value. So really excited about it, and I'll be able to share more. Like I said, I've got. It's funny because the chapter basically is populated with a little bit of writing and then like 6, 7, 8 pages worth of visualization. So it's going to be pretty detailed. Probably have to break it up. But as I sort of get writing, I'll continue to create some more of those podcasts. So I'm really excited about that. So, and I do have some other, basically non-player or non-fantasy football pieces about how we should steal strategies from other things. So I'm excited about that one too. And then I'm going to do some trade stuff in this one. I've tried to do trade stuff in the past too. I just haven't. It gets to be a little bit narrative driven, but I think I have enough stuff now to do kind of a narrative driven trade piece. So then I might do an overview, like basically like a streamlined process, incorporating all of the research from the first. From the 3 books, like into a cogent 1 chapter 10-page strategy, maybe with some sites into like, here's, go to this page for this or whatever, but sort of streamline a process. And so that's probably something that's going to be in there too. So, all right. So that's all of that. So let's do some questions. So have some questions in here. Antonio Gibson's a popular one. I saw something that was eye-opening. And listen, I like Antonio Gibson. I like the profile. I like the pedigree at the cost. What I guess concerns me a little bit is he's kind of a blank slate. That's good and bad, right? Not a ton of mileage, but not a ton of knowledge either, right? The lack of knowledge, right? That there's always that equilibrium balance between guy had 1,600 carries in college. It's an exaggeration, but 1,000 carries in college versus the guy that only had 300 carries in college. Well, the guy that had 1,000 has a lot more tread off the tires than the guy that had 300, but we know a lot more. So how do I balance that? Yada, yada. It's a knock against Jonathan Taylor, right? To some degree. So sort of how do we balance that? Well, 77 is like a different universe, and those aren't even carries. Like most of those are receptions. So, I mean, that's a totally different universe. We know that's a good athlete. So in the athlete spectrum, he's almost like Kalen Ballage, but a step up in pedigree. So to think about that, so Kalen Ballage is a 4th round guy, would have been 20% or so. Antonio Gibson is a 3rd round guy, be 40% or so. I like the athletic profile. What concerns me about guys like Antonio Gibson is the tweener thing. And so like Dexter McCluster from years back was an example of this. D'Anthony Thomas to a lesser extent, I guess. But you get some of these guys that are like these tweener types, and it always concerns me whether or not they'll get true usage. So that's one concern. So I guess my advice is going to be, if you can cash out now at no risk, I think that's appropriate. And ultimately, right. So if you're getting a first plus, I think you got to go. Like if you got to go, I think if you get like AJ Dillon or Brandon Ayuk plus for him, you got to go. Like I would take Dillon over him now still. But I think if you get something in that range plus, And it doesn't have to be a big plus. Like, I think you got to move. I think you have to do that. I think that's a really good process. And, and so that's really my thought. And then because I look at this and I also see like, all right, like, so Antonio Gibson's pretty appealing right now, but like there's other guys there. So Bryce Love we sort of know who he is, but we don't know the injury status. So he's an interesting one, but they have two pros there, right? So they have Adrian Peterson, they've got Peyton Barber. So the combination of those two things, like Peyton Barber is not going to win he's not going to win any beauty contests, but he's a professional running back. And I do think coaching staffs appreciate that. So that's one thing that I just think about that excuse me, to get all the way home, he's got to basically push AP and Bryce Love and Peyton Barber aside. Doesn't it seem like it's more likely in the next 2 years that AJ Dillon does that than Antonio Gibson? I mean, honestly, and sort of so I think about that and I'm like, eesh, so that's really sort of when I break that math down, that's something that I think, that I really, really think about. So I'm just looking at this. Let's see. From my data from 2000 to 2016, 45 running backs drafted in the third round of the NFL draft. 4 of them have been first year starters. So that's top 24. That's not a huge number. So 57% of them totally whiff in the first 3 years or so. That's not including. I got to check that number. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, so I mean, it's a low. Yes, that'd be a 43%. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So sorry, I can't do math. I was outside doing lawn work today. Can't think. So about 40% in terms of hit rate. 4 out of 45 in year one. I think that's telling, right? I think that does tell. So when you jump up to basically it essentially doubles each round above that. So 7 out of 43 and then 16 out of 44 for second and third rounders. So, and that's actually, there's 2 apiece for rounds 4 through 6, year one hits. So, right. So you basically, your odds, essentially it's more complex than this, but essentially they cut in half each round you go down. So to think that he's just going to come in and get a job, I think that's historically, pretty questionable. With the players that are there, I think that's pretty questionable. And with the, with his profile, I just think that's asking a lot. It's really, really asking a lot. So when if you're going to get a second rounder plus, I think that's the right way to move. And when we think about base rates, I think it's important that we don't overreact to information, right? All of the other players had not similar stories, but had stories like this, and it turns out the base rate, right? So you have to, I think more and more we think about this, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this is going to be part of 2021. The book is basically the curse of the expert, right? Which is the expert overthinks each situation and thinks they can read a lot of information, where ultimately when you look at the base rate, a lot of those situations had those similar things, right? And so we tend to be a lot more certain because we think, all this information. But in reality, what we should really be thinking and really be doing is put a number on it. So, all right. So I think, I'm really optimistic about Antonio Gibson this year. I think he's got a 40% shot to be a a year one starter, right? Well, the actual number is closer to 10%, right? So one of the things to think about is really, I think you should take 2/3 of the base rate and then take 1/3 of your actual number, combine them together and use that as the odds, right? So, and there are situations that are different than that, right? So a good example of this might be in the density category where like Richard Rodgers has like a really, really, really high one, right? So it's like 80% or something like that. Like we know with really good with really, really good feeling that he's probably not going to post another one. So in a situation like that, like you might be able to say, all right, like let's take his down to, 3%, something like that. And really, really weight that because it's an extreme outlier. But you should know when an extreme outlier is an extreme outlier. Antonio Gibson isn't that, right? So I really think about that and think about how we should think about this process. And that's really a big thing to me. So yeah, I'm really thinking about that and thinking about how we should look at these guys and go from there. So that's really that's really one of the one of the big things in a situation like this is to really think about players like that. So also I did note that they're round 2 and round 3 are pretty close together in terms of hit rates in the top 3 years. So that was pretty interesting to me. It's when you extend it out to the career long, second rounders sort of do better, but in the first 3 years, you can actually treat them pretty closely. The round 2 guys are much more dense, but from a baseline base rates perspective, they're actually pretty close in the first 3 years. So I think that was a notable one too. So that's a general thing on Antonio Gibson. So. All right, let's run down. So that should formulate some of the questions. If there is no season or severely shortened season, how does that affect 2020 rookie base rate numbers? Would they be lumped in the 0 years experience group with the 2021 rookies, or do they still accrue a year? I think that's a judgment thing. I think I'm probably just going to treat them like. I don't think it's going to matter because I think we're going to play it out. But I do think if we don't play the year, we're not going to count the year, right? If we play a quarter of the year, I'm still going to treat it. I think it'll be interesting to see what the actual contract accrual is, but I'm still going to treat them like their base rate number. I think we'll have to move on that a little bit if they accrue a year. So what I mean by that is if they play 4 games, right, it's a COVID disaster and the season's canceled, and they accrue a year, so all the first year guys basically have a year under their contracts, so they're a quarter of the way through the rookie deals. I don't think we should treat them exactly like a 0 experience. I think we should probably catch a middle ground because I do think part of the base rates calculus is the rookie contract year longevity aspect of it. So I do I'm not going to dock them all the way down, but I think it's probably think about it catching some sort of middle ground. I'm hoping not to worry about that, but that's just a process thing. So if we have to worry about that, we'll worry about it as we go along, but I think that's probably where my process would be. Does Gibson bump up a tier on the rookie board if trying to sell? Would AJ Dillon or Ayuk be good targets or aim higher? I think they're good targets. Personally, I do think that you might be able to get a little bit more. So I did go ahead and look at some picks. And the reason I say that, I did look at some quick trades. It doesn't look like there's only been a couple that look like they've happened. It happened on Friday. It only looks like there's a couple that have happened that I feel really confident in saying that happened since this. So Gibson in a third for Kareem Hunt is one. I'd probably take Kareem Hunt there, but I think that one's interesting. And then there's a really, really big one with a ton of moving pieces that doesn't really tell me much. So there's not really any data yet on it. I think that Antonio Gibson in a third is pretty fair for Hunt. I'd probably take the Hunt side. But it'd be more compelling to me if it was a different player other than Kareem Hunt in that range. So I hope that answers the question. Yes, he has to move up a little bit. I'm trying to pull up my rookie board, and I'm having very little success navigating my computer at the moment. I will catch it as we're sort of going through this, and I'll sort of come back. I'll loop back to that. Yes, I would move him up my board. I think that's proper and appropriate. I think he's probably fits in that. Let me see here if I can. Oh dear. Yeah, I can't seem to look. Oh, here we go. I'm trying to locate my actual board and I can't find here it is. Thrilling audio. I know. So I have him in that tier basically. No, I think it's the same tier. I have him in that. In fairness, I already had him up a tier. I had him in tier 4 on my board. So to give you an idea, Superflex, I had Taylor 101. I would, just so you know, I had Edwards-Helaire at the bottom of this. I'll switch them around. I would put, I'm putting Clyde Edwards-Helaire as my rookie 2. There's some thought process that goes along with that. It is, I made this argument for Josh Jacobs, and then I thought I was a hypocrite, so I rethought my process. But basically I said it's like you have to be insanely risky and really disregarding base rates to have 2 second-round rookies over a first-round running back who's already hit. Like I could see justifying 1. I can't see justifying 2. And so when I did that, I said, well, aren't I doing that by having 2 guys over a bunch of guys over Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? I'm sort of being a hypocrite. So I've thought more and more about that process. And I've put Clyde Edwards-Helaire at my running back 2 in this class. I don't necessarily think I would take him there. I'd probably trade out of it. Because I think the value is appropriate to do so. But that is a process thing that has come up that I've changed my opinion on. So I did change the rookie board to reflect that, and my rankings at Football Guys reflect that too. So I have those 4 and the 2 quarterbacks, Burrow and Tua, in tier 2. So that's basically top 7 rookie picks. I got the next 4 wide receivers, Judy, Lamb, Rager, Jefferson in that range. The next range, which I call tier 3, Justin Herbert's in that range as well. So is A.J. Dillon. And that's just a reflection that A.J. Dillon should be essentially a target guy right after those receivers go off the board. And then the tier after that is where I have Gibson. So I have Gibson in there with Keyshawn Vaughn and Zach Moss. I've had that throughout. And my note on him since the beginning has been he's a key after Dillon. Brandon Ayuk was before me. It was before Gibson. So basically, if I was hopscotching my board, it would be Dillon, Ayuk, Gibson. And so that was essentially how I did it. I think it's pretty much the same. That's sort of how I feel. And I get that that's probably an underreaction, but again, sort of the similar process that I talked about earlier. I think that's really how I think about these things. So Keith asks, philosophical question. Within the dynasty community, we often use terms and phrases from the world of stocks and investing. Yes. Do you think this has an effect on how we view players' value, and as trade pieces? Perhaps once we join a certain number of leagues, this is the only way to manage. I guess I'm asking, in what way do you see the implementation of investing theory into dynasty as a good or bad thing? There are people that just view players as commodities. probably more than I do. You know, I so and just look to trade them. And just look to do that. Basically, almost treating Dynasty like day trading. I don't do that. I think there's probably value in it if you're good at it. I am not. I don't think. I don't have the. That's just not a skill of mine that I'm think is plus EV. I do think I'm an above average trader, but I don't think in terms of trying to predict where value is going to be that I'm particularly good at that. And I just think that's more of a random walk long term. And so, it's not a random walk. It is a walk that's totally correlated to player production. So that I don't think we're particularly good at predicting. So that's really where I think, that's, I think, the difference. So there are folks that I know that do this more in terms of treating it like just basically day trading. That's not something that I feel particularly comfortable with because that's not a skill that I am particularly good at. So I don't think that's wrong. But that's just not sort of where my analysis and skill sort of align. So my analysis and skill more align with identifying, productive profiles and sort of hitting them and treating them as investment opportunities. So I do think we should think about it in terms of that. One thing the more and more I'm thinking about it, right, the overvalued, undervalued player, and I was talking about this a little bit with Jacobs earlier, is I'm sort of understanding each year that I'm going to do more startup drafts. And I'm in a couple of leagues each year that I'm sort of whittling out of. So I know probably there's 3 or 4 leagues that just aren't doing it for me for a variety of reasons. And there's a good chance that there will be another 1 or 2 that might fade away or whatever. That's why I do like institutional leagues, because that way I know that they're going to be there. But there's a couple of leagues that I just don't really do it for me. So I'm probably going to end up getting out of them. And I know that I'll probably pick up 3, 4, 5 more leagues, just again, for something to talk about on here, different ways to maximize strategy. But a key thing is the changing player values, right? That's really the key thing for me, and why I like to do startup drafts both early and late. Do them early. And I think early, and I'm doing a piece on this in Analytics at Dynasty. Early is the time I think you can really focus on a different subset of players, right? Really avoid rookie wide receivers, but you can go after rookie running backs, for example. That's a thing to do. And then I think there's some opportunity to get some rookie wide receiver value later on in the market, right? So again, if in a normal year where you get a slow starter at wide receiver in training camp, they sort of fall in value. Maybe Mike Williams from a couple of years ago is a good example of this. You just collect the share, right? And that's really, I sort of hate diversifying, but I think of diversifying is a different way in terms of the calendar of player acquisition, right? So if you do a bunch of rookie drafts early in in May, and then wait 4 months, 3 months till late July, August in a normal year, and then start hitting different player profiles, or you start coming in and saying, hey, listen, now I don't know, pick somebody, Justin Jefferson, right? Next year's Justin Jefferson, instead of being worth a mid first round rookie pick, he's actually more like a middle of the second round rookie pick. He's fallen 6 rounds in startup valuation. That's a good buy opportunity, right? So that's more and more how I'm thinking about. Again, I look at my players as exposures in terms of how many shares I own of them, but thinking about different ways to acquire them, that's a different thing that I'm doing too. So having some spacing, and then I'll say to myself, I'll set sort of a budget or a plan in the preseason or early in the off season, say, all right, I'm going to do 5 or 6 startup drafts, and here's the amount of money or whatever. Have a plan for that, and then start looking at what I think is value, we identified early on that Josh Jacobs was probably a value, and I was hammering him, right? And then I kept saying, I see value here. I see value here. There's value in the market that I can accumulate. And that's sort of how I went about it. So that was the type of investing decision that I went. So I probably went earlier in the offseason with startup drafts just because I thought there was value there. Plus, I was kind of bored. So, but yeah, so I do think there's a way to look at it. I think it's more so than just buying high and selling low. It's different ways to get that, right? Like drafting rookies in August that have fallen in price is just a different form of buying low, right? And that's actually that some of the rookie hype has faded. That's actually a good way to sort of collect a rookie share. So that's something that I think about a lot. And different times and things on acquisitions. So, thinking about when rookie picks are undervalued, for example, right? We know that rookie picks are undervalued in season, buying them low and then trading them or using them in rookie drafts. It's a positive EV scenario. So that's a lot about how I think about it. I do think there's a lot of investment ideas. I do think the idea of diversifying is bad because if you're just playing ADP on the flip side of, just playing the market, if you're just playing ADP, you're going to get about average, and about average doesn't win. Right. And so when you're investing or when you're, and this is a lot of the reason why you take insurance on your house, right? You don't want a fire or a candle to fall, burn a curtain, light your house on fire, and then you have $0, right? That's why you insure your house. In Dynasty, right, you sort of need that. Insuring yourself doesn't really capture the upside, right? So that's a different way to look at it. That's kind of why I don't feel that investment analogy is great, because you shouldn't just play the market. If you're playing, 1,000 best balls, and you're looking for exposure that way, I think it's a little bit different of a story. You're playing a little bit different of a game. But in Dynasty, you're not just trying to capture average, right? You're not just trying to capture the market. You're trying to finish in the top one, the top one team or the top two teams in the regular season. You're trying to finish with a top 17% or a top 8% outcome, right? So that's where I think the investment thing goes a little too far, is in questions like that. How do you evaluate yourself as a dynasty player? Is ROI the ultimate measure for you, or do you rely on other considerations to judge if you're improving, have an edge year over year? That's a really good question. There's so much fickleness in ROI. So like last year, for example, I took an absolute bath, and I do think it's important for me, at least, because I like to be honest and sort of forthcoming about things. When I make bad trades, I talk about bad trades. I wrote a chapter in the first one about basically how I did a rebuild and how there was a horrific trade in there, and the process was probably okay. The trade was unequivocally bad result. So I do think ROI is fickle, right? There's a lot of variance year over year. But maybe we look at it in a 3-year window, right? Or, last year, for example. So in 2018, I had a huge ROI in terms of, the best fantasy year I'd ever had. But if I sort of go back to week 16 and I was sitting essentially in the same spots that I'm sitting right now, my desk was turned the other way, but was sitting right here watching the Seattle Seahawks game in week 16. And I had in multiple places stacked Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin, and they went crazy and won me 2 championships. And the ROI would have been a lot different if that hadn't happened. Right. So that's one thing I really think about. It is fickle, right? And it's fickle last year because of injuries. And, I got just face planted in week 14, and I lost. Like I couldn't. Like it was nearly an impossible outcome, right? Even if you put me at like 50% odds, like it was a really, 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 really low percentage chance that I ended the way that I did in week 14. It was just insane. But that part of that is I shouldn't have been playing week 14, right? There was a lot of things that went into that. That's not necessarily my fault, but that went wrong along the way. So I don't think ROI year over year, if you have a good year, that means you're good, and you have a bad year, that means you suck. I don't think that's it. I do think you should look at it in sort of in maybe a couple of years, right? And sort of look in 2 to 3 year windows, see how you're doing. I do think, keeping a decision tree or a decision journal, it makes a lot of sense. Go back and evaluate. And some of that stuff will be a little bit subjective, but I think that's a good way to really evaluate yourself, self-scout. I do think it's important to think about that. I think a lot about the decisions I make and sort of how to do that. Trading journal, draft picks, right? Looking at all of that, and then maybe in a more, again, it's fickle year over year, but I think there can be a lot of risk in looking at just 1 year of win-loss record, but maybe putting down your teams in advance and saying, hey, listen, here's sort of what I think about these teams. Here's the teams that I think are in a contending window. Here's the teams I think that are in a rebuilding window. Here's the tweener teams. And then sort of looking and seeing, what your all play record is in those groups. So, all right, here's the teams I think I'm contending with in 2020. Track what their outplay record is. And then you can sort of see, all right, like that'll tell you how you're doing evaluating yourself. But that's a good thing to look at year over year, right? Because there's more sample. There's not as much fickleness in terms of luck of one-off games. So an 8-5 record, but you're actually 44% win percentage, right? Those are one doesn't tell you the truth, and you can flip flop that as well. So that would be something that I'd really look at. But again, keep in mind that those things are highly variant year over year. If you lose Barkley or you lose a player, right, you're going to lose more games, and those things happen, right? So I do think a lot of it is making sure you're making better decisions, right? And sometimes the decisions will work out, sometimes they won't, but try and continue to make better decisions, learn more, try different things. And one thing I always try and do each year is to find a different thing that I think I struggle at and get better at it. So a couple of years ago, it was really managing lineups. So I had a whole process that I went through with managing my lineups from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. It's Jordan time on Sundays, right? I sit at my computer, I do all my lineups, make sure I've got everything right, the best that I can. But I was like, and when you get sort of bigger lineups, or bigger amount of teams, you can miss things. And I was missing things, and it was aggravating to no end. And so I just said, I have to really improve this process. And then the same thing with ad drops. For me, it's ad drops this year, really, really focusing on being better at ad drops. So I think each year finding a different thing, learning how to be better at it. I think that's a really, really good way to self-evaluate and measure yourself. All right. If Goddard is this is from Joe. Matt, I hope that answered your question. This is from Joe. If Goddard is being valued highly in an offense we think might be 12 personnel bunch, shouldn't Njoku be valued more highly? Maybe. The problem that I have with that is I can see Goddard being the second most targeted player in that offense. I can't see that for Njoku. So I do think there's a little bit of difference there. So that's one thing that I don't think we should put Njoku in the same sphere. I do think that Njoku is probably a value where he is at. So I think of them a little bit differently. Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry are much better than their anyone that you could put near them in terms of the Philadelphia offense. So I think Goddard has more upside just because I think almost out of necessity they need to throw him the ball, where I don't think they need to do that with Njoku. Do you think the NFL should bubble up? Yes. And not to get into a rabbit hole here, but it has worked for the NBA, and there was a lot of it. I was listening to a podcast today. Some of the stuff that went into this, like they're going to write a book about this, and just some of the process that went into this, it's going to be just unbelievable. And they're not there yet, right? They haven't hit a home run yet, but it's gone as well as it could go through, I don't know, whatever it is, 3-4 weeks, whatever it's been. I don't think it's feasible for the NFL. There's just too many people. And I think it's probably longer too, right? 22. I don't know how long the one for the NBA is going to be. I would guess sometime in like October, so that'd be August, maybe like 3 months. It would just be a lot longer for the NFL. So I just don't think it'll work for the NFL. There's just too many people. And I just don't know where you would put them all. Plus being away from your family that's almost like double the time. It's just a lot. I think you'd see more people opt out. Thoughts on trading Geis for John Ross in a third? Yeah, that third round valuation I've seen on Darius Geis in a couple spots. I'd probably take the third. John Ross is fine. I don't think there's a ton of value there. I do think getting that future third, getting that liquidity for Geis is fine right now. I'd probably give a future fourth. I do think there's some. This is not my favorite topic to talk about, but in domestic violence cases, I think there's we might overreact to the value drop on them just because they're really, really tough to prosecute. And I don't think the market reacts like that. So the Tyreek Hill thing's a good example. Zeke's probably also a good example, but it went the other way. So we could write a book about that case. But I think that Geis is more likely. How should I say? I think it's more likely that Geis is harmed by not being picked up by a team than it is from a suspension. So, Le'Veon Bell or DJ Shark probably depends on the contending window. I do think Le'Veon Bell is pretty interesting this year, so I think he's pretty undervalued. Landry or Gallup, I would take Landry. Harry or Christian Kirk, that's an interesting one. Probably N'Keal Harry. But Kirk is interesting. The problem is I just don't know how he gets to full volume with DeAndre Hopkins just clouds out the entire sun. I can see Harry getting a lot more volume than I can Christian Kirk. Larry Fitzgerald's not going anywhere this year, at least. How does that another year of a miss hurt Christian Kirk? So I think Harry's got more upside. So I'd say Harry. Rojo or Madison. Oh man. This one's gonna hurt. I think Ronald Jones for 2020 is really the thing. I do. I would take Ronald Jones over Alexander Madison for this year, certainly. And honestly, I think if I'm going to do that, I have to probably take Rojo over Madison. So I'm really coming around on Rojo for 2020. So for like subscription competitions and those sorts of things, for like the Football Guys competition that I have, I'm in it. I'm a staffer this year, so I'm in it. I've been in it before, not ever really performed particularly well. I got to rethink that strategy process, but he's probably going to be a target player, I would imagine. Who do you like in the late first or early second round rookie drafts after Dillon? On the wide receiver side, is Ruggs a steal at the spot given his draft pedigree? Does Geis release really help Gibson in the short run? That's from Mike from Canada. Mike, I hope that the conversation earlier, I know you posted this well before the show started. I hope that gives you an idea on Gibson. I sort of hit that with some depth. I like Ayuk quite a bit. I like him over Ruggs, actually. I do think when you get in the problem with Ruggs is he never broke out in college, and the hit rate on that's horrible. It's really, really bad. there's not a lot of priors on guys going in the first round of the NFL draft and not hitting. So, and guys that don't hit in like second and third rounds as well, like it's really bad in terms of priors. So the best argument I've heard for Ruggs, and I think I agree with it, I just wonder sort of how it turns out, is that Ruggs really needed to go to a place that had basically nothing. And the reason why is he needed to go to a situation where he could sort of be inefficient, he could not be great, but by necessity would have to be targeted, was essentially it. You know, basically it's really, it's bad students can score well on an easy test. If you're grading on a curve, like they can actually score, they can score well enough to score a really high grade on a curve test just because it wasn't that hard. But once you get to being really, really hard, they just can't cut it, right? That's sort of the thing. And that would happen in when I was in school and stuff, you would just see some of those things. If you were in a class, you'd hope for, and really good at it, you'd hope for a hard test, because only the really good students in that could hit the really, really high outcome on those curve tests. So basically that was the argument for Ruggs. And he seemed to have hit it with the Raiders, right? Like Tyrell Williams is okay. Renfro's okay. Darren Waller, right? Late breakout, but I think that's more necessity. There's not really an answer, right? So you could see Ruggs sort of crack the depth chart and make an impact in year one, right? Because there wasn't a lot to stand in his way. Whereas if he went to like Denver, for example, right, like it would have boosted Sutton's stock, because you just don't think that he can really make that much of an impact, or he's going to draw that many targets with all the good pieces around him. So it's really my feeling on Ruggs. So, I see they're going to move him in the slot and use him there. It'll be interesting. I would probably still go Ayuk. I'd probably check my board here while I'm at it. I've got him in the Gibson tier. Probably take Gibson over him. Him versus T. Higgins is interesting. I think he's in that range, and probably for being in that range, I'm going to be out on him. I would take Ayuk over him. I think him versus Gibson's a coin flip. I would definitely take AJ Dillon above him. So I think you're probably at that point not going to face that decision. That's probably looking at start one. You're looking like 204, 205, 206, somewhere in that range where that matters. I think it's probably not going to matter at that point. But T. Higgins versus him's interesting. I think there's a reasonable case to put T. Higgins over him. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I'd feel at it. So is giving Kupp for 105, which would be Akers, Swift, too much? Kupp has concerns, but he's guaranteed a ton of targets. No, I don't want to undersell him. Maybe better to wait until the season and make an offer for Akers or Swift if they start slow. So I've seen some really interesting analysis on this one, and it's from patrons, actually. Part in the GroupMe chat. Again, if you're not in there, this is part of the value of it. Some of the research that gets bounced around in there is outstanding. But basically, after they made their switch to playing two tight ends last year, it really, really capped Kupp. So that was an eye-opening thing for me in terms of usage. And there's a similar argument there about why they took Van Jefferson, right? That sort of fits in, that they needed an outside guy. Kupp doesn't really play outside. A marginal amount of what he's done has been outside. It's almost exclusively been in the slot. I do think he's a trusted target for Goff, but their offense could be going in a different direction. He is not under contract next year, so he'll be a free agent. How does that fit? That'll be something we'll have to see. I don't think it's a bad trade. I'm just looking down here at the real draft position. I think, although it's freezing up on me, probably have too much open. Swift and Akers are both going ahead of him. So I think that's pretty telling, honestly. He's going more in the Jerry Jeudy CD Lamb range. So if you could get up to 105, I think that's a market improvement. And yeah, I like Swift and Akers, so I would do that. I would take that. I would do that deal. All right, so I think that's it for the patron questions. Actually, I do have. I think I had one from last week. I still have to clean up. And I will do that. There's a couple in here. Would you move Antonio Gibson on your rookie board with the Geist News? Talked about that earlier, Steve. Hope that helps. I'm with you. Jacob stands out as a buy right now. This is from Brian. How much do you factor in the instability of a franchise and its ownerships? The Washington football team and Terry McLaurin, good example. Are there a certain few franchises that you completely avoid? I don't. I know I've heard this, and I actually think the Buffalo experience with Josh Allen sort of was, I think, totally wrong, and something that I think is a learning point. These things change so quickly, and I talked about it on the Football Guy show. You should go, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to last week's. We talked a lot about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the move in value. It was a lot of fun, and actually we got halfway through it and multiple people said, I can't take this, I'm leaving. You guys are sort of just horrible in your analysis. And I was like, another satisfied group of customers, I guess. But it was actually what I thought was pretty good process, but turned out that some people just didn't want to hear it. But I thought it was pretty good in terms of talking about value. The completely avoid thing, I think people will say that, and things change so quickly. And that's really the thing we highlighted was the wide receivers. Like we went back, I think it was 2018. I looked at their wide receivers and I just sort of started through the top 15 as we were going along and just sort of looked at them. And the amount of change that took place, and it was like totally unpredictable change too. Like DeAndre Hopkins has been traded, Odell Beckham Jr. has been traded, Antonio Brown was traded twice or traded once, maybe traded twice, or signed by New England and then cut and then retired, unretired, retired again, maybe suspended. Just insane amount of change. There was, I think, another trade in there, multiple different quarterbacks. It just totally stuff that we couldn't have predicted. Like Julian Edelman was up there, and we didn't expect Brady to leave, and Mike Evans, we didn't expect Jameis Winston to leave, and it was just all these different things, and there was just so much instability, and I think that's really a theme of this. So I don't think Washington fits in this category because I think Ron Rivera is different. Same reason why the Detroit running back thing, the post, the whatever, the curse of Barry Sanders. I've never bought that just because it's different coaching staffs, right? There's a chance that it's just random luck. Like I don't think that they made a bad selection with Kerryon Johnson. It just hasn't worked out. And so I don't really believe in those things. And maybe there's certain systems that are bad. But again, the Josh Allen thing in Buffalo, right? That everyone was like, oh, that team's horrible. That team's horrible. Like a year ago, and they made the playoffs and were like really good. And I kept like looking around and being like, there's a lot of good pieces on this team. Like they've got an all-pro corner, and like they've actually got some good pieces on offense. And I just kept looking around and I was like, I don't buy this narrative at all. And I was like, I actually, I think their coaching staff's holding them back, and the coaching staff totally and rapidly overhauled itself in terms of it was almost like they went to a Moneyball class and, went to like advanced analytics for 6 months and came back and like did a ton of like high efficiency stuff. And honestly, probably added a win to a win and a half last year just based on like going for it on fourth down and, passing on first down, like legitimately move their record in terms of decisions that they made. So I do think those things can change. And with Washington, I do think they've got the right man, or a great man for the job in terms of Ron Rivera. So I'm not a buyer on those narratives. Never have been. I think they're over. And honestly, they don't appreciate the fact that we as human beings can grow. And maybe that's overselling us, right? There's certainly an argument there to take a more negative view, but a lot of these people are 22 years old, right? In terms of players, the fact that they can't mature quickly, that's a steep maturity range, at least in my life, and some of the people that I've seen in that range. So I do think, betting against franchises is there's probably value in it too. If people are saying everyone's going to be bad, I think there's value in it. So that's really my thought on that. So I hope that answers that question. Let me see here. I did want to go back and look at, I had a question, I think, from last week that I didn't catch, and it came in just at the end of the show. So I just want to make sure I hit it. Let's see here. Okay. So finished the 2020 book last night. Is there a place where you have warps and stuff? I don't have a warps calculated, actually, that you can see from 2019. Something happened with MFL and their start sit rate. So I can't quite grab that yet. So I will get that. And that was just the only question there. Okay. So, yeah, so that's pretty much it. Trading up into the top 5 is proving very difficult. Have options to stick at 110, 111, 202, 203. I do think you can package a couple of those pieces together and move up into the top 5 of a rookie draft. Who else do you like amongst Moss, Vaughn, Gibson, Evans, etc.? I've got the rookie board up there, Mike, so go ahead and check that out. And so I have them tiered. Again, the tiers in there and the tiers generally are organized essentially by draft order. The tiers for running back, quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end are actually organized by ADP early in the season. I can go back in there and probably tinker with it if that would help. I just sort of put them there just because that was the easiest way to do it. And then it just reads the data off of it. It's not meant to be rankings. It's meant to be just sort of a compilation of data with my notes. So that's important to also know. But the tiers for my rookie draft board are the players. I put them in a tier and then I sort them by draft pedigree. So just because I think that's an important thing to think about. And then I sort of highlight who I'd have targets in specific ranges. So based on price. So I do think Evans is interesting. Like Lynn Bowden's actually interesting second, third, or later in the third round. Again, profiles, day 2 running backs are pretty interesting. So that's a thing as well. But yeah, Moss, Vaughn, again, that's later in the second round for me, probably not where they're going. Dylan, Ayuk. But I would try and package those 10, 11, 202, 203. I bet you can probably get, if not one, you could even get, a couple of shots in the top 5. So that would sort of be my thought process there. So Alex, last one. How are you adjusting, or this is the most recent one. If you still have a question, go ahead, drop it in here. How are you adjusting your models for future college prospects? Freshmen who miss this year will all have a later breakout age. Yeah, I don't. Fortunately, we've got time to think about this. And that's anything, I guess my easy answer for anything like this. So anything that has to do with like future classes, future picks is a different story because we're in it now, right? I do think future picks in terms of their liquid value make a lot of sense right now. As just sort of stash things. Does that ultimately make sense when we get down the line? Does trading a first in season for like Julio Jones or something like that make sense? Yeah, probably. But I think the liquidity of owning them right now makes sense. And then we can sort of figure it out later. So that, again, it's like sitting on cash. Think about investments like I don't like to be in debt and I like to have cash, right? So I never like to trade away future picks, and I like to sit on extra ones. That's my cash. So that's it for me in terms of thinking about that process. For future picks, we have time to think about this. We have time to figure out what we're going to do with base rates, or what we're going to do, how we're going to think about first round draft picks next year, how we're going to think about their hit rates, how we're going to think about the lack of production or production value changing, or all of those things. We have time to figure that out. I wouldn't worry about it right now. It's a great question to think about. I wouldn't lose sleep on it right now. We can think about it long term. It's a great thing to have sort of in the back of our mind to think about, and we'll have to adjust. And that's the value of base rates and understanding rates, is that where to start from, and then make an educated decision on where to move. Right? That's the value of it. That's the beauty of it. So we will have to do that. I'm not worried about it right now, because I do think you're going to get. We'll know more as we go along, and I think a lot of right now is just speculating about what might happen. So I'm positive. Joe Bryant from Football Guys is wearing off on me. He thinks everything's going to go off without a hitch, and he's just super optimistic, and I'm going to just adopt that. And if it doesn't, we'll have to figure that out. But I can't take the stress of it right now. So we're just going to go with it. All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode. I hope you enjoy this. I love it. I have noticed that getting questions out, getting this posted like midday on Sunday has helped sort of some of the questions come in. So I'm going to keep doing that. I like taking the questions, and they formulate my thoughts as well. So I'm going to keep doing that, and keep driving content as this is going to keep going on into, as through training camp, in terms of these Sunday shows. I'll probably do an in-week show. Sunday doesn't make a lot of sense for me to do a show during the season, just because Sunday nights is Football Guys recap night for me, and I got to sort of watch tape and look at stats and have stuff ready. So maybe it's like a Thursday night thing. I know that sort of clashes with Football Guys, but we'll figure it out. I'm not going to do a Sunday. I just can't do Sunday night during the week, and there's football on. Like, you guys don't want to hear me talk while football's on. So I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm going to schedule polls and stuff. I'm still thinking about it. I keep saying this, and I'm actually going to do it. Get together a little focus group in terms of some content stuff. So look out for that. I'll probably schedule it this week, and then probably schedule it for next week, but put out stuff this week. So maybe do it as a Zoom little town hall type thing. So, all right, well, that'll do it for this Sunday night hangout. Until next time, keep embracing the variance, and we will talk again very soon.